Today, we're going to be talking about the Heisenberg Theory. Now, the Heisenberg Theory is in quantum physics, and you may be asking yourself, Nick, what in the world is a consumer behavior consultant actually talking about quantum physics? Well, it's a great question, and glad you didn't ask. Today, we're going to actually break it down why it's important, but it is a very good way to explain and draw an analogy between why consumer insights are so difficult to draw out of people and why market research in the wrong hands, it's why it should be left to people who have done this before. And getting insights is not as simple as asking a question. And we're going to talk about it today and draw a very interesting link between the Heisenberg Theory, which is itself incredibly widely misunderstood, and it relates in a lot of ways more than I hope by the end of this you'll see than most people would think. So we'll talk a little bit about the Heisenberg Theory, and then we'll go into why that matters. So the Heisenberg Theory, as you can, if you don't already know, essentially what it is it's our explanation as to why we cannot see certain things at the elemental level. And so when you think about why we're able to see things are visible. That's an eyeball. Things are visible because this is object A. Object A are waves, light waves, are actually bouncing off that and returning information. Now, the information returned tells our brain what we're actually looking at. Hey, this is object A. Object B may look a little different, but that's all in the waves that it bounces back. So in that sense, being able to see something has everything to do with us interacting with it. And us interacting with it has everything to do with the ability for the light waves to actually hit this object in question. So why does that have anything to do with consumer insights? It has everything to do with consumer insights because where the Heisenberg Theory actually steps in is because at the elemental level, things are so hard to see that light waves can't actually pick them up. And that's due to the fact that elemental particles are so small. And because they're so small, you'd essentially have to use bigger and bigger waves to see those things. So let's switch to a smaller marker. So these waves, even though they look very small, elemental particle A is so tiny that this obviously is not to scale. It would be more like this. It's too small to even be seen, right? You're not even able to see elemental particle A because the waves just pass right over it. Now that's a good way to think about the Heisenberg Theory. And to complete that thought, the Heisenberg Theory says, well, it's the uncertainty theory, because the only situation in which man has come up with how we can fix this is what we do is we actually go in and we say, okay, well, if these waves are actually too large or too small or too large, let's actually create a wave that's even smaller. And in this situation where you're creating waves that are much, much, much smaller, let's delete this. It's more difficult to create this wave. So you may actually be creating a wave that's really, really small to see particle A, but because it took so much energy to create that, let's call this an aura. So this is all energy. It took a lot of energy to create that, which isn't intuitive in nature, but to create something so small, and I guess really the idea would be these waves would be so aggressive and sporadic and you can call this the trough in the peak. But although you got a really small wave, this energy all around it is actually increased, so it actually changes this. So the second contact A is able to be seen, the very fact that we can measure and see it and touch it finally, it actually changed it. So this energy hits this particle A and it changes it. And the reason why I love that analogy is because when you think about it, That's exactly what the consumer is like, and why consumer research is so difficult to understand. And here's where we start to draw the comparison between Heisenberg's theory and consumer insights. Consumer insights is a lot like that, in that the closer you get to the consumer, the closer you get to what would be that critical moment, as we like to call it at Deep Bridge, is the consumer will sense your presence. They will notice that you're touching an insecurity and a vulnerability, whatever the case may be, and they start to alter their answers. When the consumer is aware of the questions you're asking and the angle you're trying to reach, I sort of think of it like also like a litigator. When someone else can see where you're going, they'll do whatever they can to kind of alter that. And the consumer will start to sense, they're smart in the sense that they're very smart in the sense that they're protecting their own emotion. And as someone who's interested in consumer insights, I'm interested in why people buy the way they do, which at the end of the day, ultimately is their emotion, their behavior, their intent, their patterns. When a consumer feels like you're in their head poking around, they'll do whatever they have to do to not let you get what you're after, because they don't really understand why you're looking for it, but they don't trust you with that information. When someone feels your presence poking, they're not going to let you stay there. And so in that sense, they start to change their answers, their behaviors, their patterns. They might say something different. They may say, I brush my teeth for 2 minutes. If you ask them flat out, how long do you brush your teeth? But if you don't ask them how long they brush your teeth, you could say things like, well, how long do you get ready in the morning? Okay, what does that mostly consist of? All right, you said you get ready for 10 minutes. Washing your face takes 5 minutes. A quick shower, you said about 4 minutes. You don't brush your teeth in the shower. As I say this out loud, this would be astronomically fast, of course, but you get the point. Now you're down to 9 minutes. Well, you said you brush your teeth for 2 minutes. They only left 1 minute. And so let's say they were perfectly calculating, or they had someone measure. Well, they may be insecure about the fact that they only brush their teeth for 1 minute. Some people, you're supposed to brush your teeth for 2 minutes. Coming from oral care, I know that specifically at P&G, but a lot of people don't do that. And so let's say it wasn't 1 minute, it was much shorter, it was 30 seconds, or they didn't brush their teeth this morning at all. That's something that they may be insecure about. And in that case, if they lets it leak out, or if you somehow figure it out, they're going to be very embarrassed and insecure. If that was something they were embarrassed and insecure about, I'm not saying they should be. But a consumer, when they feel like they're poking around and they feel like you're poking around, they're not sure what the information is being used for, they're going to protect themselves, their emotions at all costs. It isn't as simple as, okay, well, they're just changing their answer. You have to understand why they're doing it so you know what you're up against. And that's why consumer insights are so hard to figure out, because the very fact that your presence is felt will start to dictate the answers they give. And that's why Deep Bridge Consulting, something that's very hard to actually put into words, is our models and processes are very proven, and they're so, in terms of pulling out insight, they're sophisticated in the sense that we can ask questions and get to intent in a way that a lot of research that we've seen cannot. We can understand what motivates human beings, and ultimately what drives a human being to make a purchase. If you knew that information, you can create products and services and copy and language that is ultimately the most persuasive. If you knew what really drove someone, that makes for incredibly powerful marketing, right? So that is why the Heisenberg theory of uncertainty is so incredibly interesting. And it in a lot of ways, it doesn't have a lot of answers, and a lot of people are just, they're split on the understanding of what it is, and it's misquoted a lot too. But in the same way that because elemental particles are so small, light waves, it takes light waves to see things. When you need to create enough energy to make these waves be able to pick up these tiny, tiny particles, the very fact that you can measure it, it alters the particle itself. And that principle, that idea is the exact same with insights. That if you have to do the work, and all of a sudden to get this out, all of a sudden a consumer is aware of what you're doing, the very presence that you can measure that, and conspicuously you can ask them a question. The more conspicuous you are, the more obvious you are, the less likely you're going to get the true emotion, because at the end of the day, everyone, whether subconsciously or consciously, is out to protect themselves. And the consumer is no different, especially when it's a volunteer situation and it's market research in a very casual setting. no one's just going to up and offer the most vulnerable thing. And that's why in a lot of times people will be surprised, like, that person was really emotional. That's good. If someone gets emotional, that was a barrier, that was a guard they had up that they let down for the sake of the research, which is great, but you can't expect that. And actually, you should expect the opposite. So insights are Occam's razor. Actually, in this situation, you shouldn't trust. The most simple explanation, don't trust it. Go after the deepest explanation. Yeah, vet all situations. But if you get an answer and it's simple, I'm not saying abandon that principle, but what I am saying is, in the situation of real, genuine consumer insights, the most powerful insight is the one that's tucked, buried away, and hidden. And the better you can reveal it, the better your marketing can be. And the tricky part is, usually for the most part, it's either held down by an insecurity, it's attached to something personal, it's not very easily given up. But understanding pain points and delivering solutions to those very pain points, the deeper you can understand it, the deeper your execution, the deeper your solution can actually go in terms of giving value back to that consumer. So the ability for your marketing to actually convert has a direct one-to-one correlation with how well do you understand your consumer, and how well you understand your consumer has everything to do with how good and talented and capable are you, how good is your framework at pulling out the deepest insight and emotion and purchase behavior, why people buy. So at Deep Rich Consulting, that's what we're about, is getting to the really, what is it that someone is actually making a purchase? Why do someone behave the way they do? Why do they shop for that? Why do they not look at the competitor? Why does price sensitivity matter? All of it really is a very sophisticated, convoluted psychology framework, and if it's not put together in some way that makes sense, you're not able to pull out what you need to pull out. So that's what we do here, is pull out very efficiently. We make these actionable insights out of the consumer's voice. So if that's something you're looking for, let us know. But we wanted to just go ahead and draw that analogy because it's interesting, and we want to make market research and consumer insights as interesting as humanly possible. It is very technical when you get down to it, and anyone who says it isn't probably should be avoided. So check out more of our analogies here, or you can just check out more of our content at Deep Rich Consulting.